All right. So, you know that satire is fun, right? But the question is, did you know that it's also an extremely powerful form of communication? And that's what I'm here to talk about today. Here to talk about the role that satire has been playing in changing politics, especially in our nation. The kind of satire that we're seeing now is incredibly unique. Satire has always been a part of political commentary. We have Ben Franklin as one of the key parts of our nation's history. But today, satire matters more than ever. It's becoming the primary source of news, not just the comment on it. And it's also an incredibly significant form of communication for millennials. In fact, we could argue that millennials can't think about politics without also thinking about satire. And then the other thing that's really cool about satire is that it makes us smarter. So if you consume satire regularly, you become a smarter citizen. Now, there are so many examples I could give you, right, of how satire has specifically changed politics. One of the things that we know is that Tina Fey's rendition of Sarah Palin likely had a lot to do with the outcome of that election. And the brilliance of Tina Fey wasn't just that she looked a lot like Sarah Palin, it was that she repeated verbatim. She didn't have to write anything. So that was nice for her. And then we had Stephen Colbert stand 5 feet away from President Bush at a moment in our nation's history when it seemed as though no one wanted to speak truth to power, and just said, not, whoa, what's going on? He said, I love this guy. I am so excited by the things he's done. And that was what really tipped it, right? Within moments of that presentation in front of the White House Correspondents Association, there was a video of the performance. It had been seen 100,000 times in the first hour. This is significant, right? And then, of course, Jon Stewart's passed legislation, right? He's played a significant role in bringing attention to the first responders and to vets issues. So we're talking about a whole new level of engagement. Now, this is just, you have to see the picture. Okay, then we also had Stephen Colbert walk us through what is messed up in campaign finance by starting his own super PAC. And he didn't just start his own super PAC. He went to college students and said, start your own. By the time of the election, 8% of super PACs were student run. That's how many kids started them to learn about the relationship between money and politics today. And so what we are seeing is that the satirists are making being political fun, right? It's not this idea that if you're being political, you have to be serious and you have to be, grind. Now we're seeing politics can be entertaining and fun at the same time. So that can't be good, right? We hear about it all the time, right? You guys, the millennials especially, apathetic, cynical, slacktivist stoners, hedonists. Like, you're looking at pictures of cats. You can't be serious political participators. Snark. I can't go a day without snark. My son says that sarcasm is the body's natural response to stupid. I don't know where he got that. But the seriousness behind this, though, is that the immediate question I always get when I'm doing an interview is, satire's bad, right? Because it makes you cynical. And I say, satire cannot make you disappointed in something that's not disappointing.
Yes.
If you don't have a disappointing government and a disappointing media, you've got nothing to be satirical about. In fact, the satirists would all just go on vacation if there weren't something to call our attention to, right? And the other side of it, though, is that satire is starting to fill this huge role, right? It's creating a space where young people especially find the journalists they admire. I mean, when this first came out, we didn't know it was going to happen to Brian Williams. But you see that Jon Stewart and Brian Williams are tied as most admired journalists. And you also see that, especially millennials, are often getting their news first from satire. People think, that can't be good too, right? You need to read the New York Times. Except, it turns out, the real news isn't really doing what we need. So the question is, which news is the fake news? Because it may be the case that the changes in the news media have become so severe that we need the satirists to help us unpack the sensationalism and hype and hubris that is so consistently a part, especially of television news, right? And then we've got the 24/7 cycle, which means that so much news time is actually punditry. And pundits are so bad because they feel the news at you, as Colbert said on his very first show, right? They don't let you form an opinion. They tell you what theirs is really aggressively. And sometimes you get to have two of them feeling the news at each other aggressively. And that's supposed to be a good show, right? That was the Crossfire meltdown. So what you need to do is get the news and think about it for yourself. And so what we find is that when people watch shows like The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, and of course John Oliver's new show, we have other examples, they score higher on aptitude of current political issues than anybody else. They tie with like NPR. So this is not bad because it becomes one of the, what would happen without it, right? Now, the other thing is that we have real data that suggests that sometimes watching the news makes you less informed. I'm not saying it, it's just right there. So, what is it about satire that makes it so good, right? Well, one of the things is that it actually makes your brain work harder because satire doesn't say explicitly, oh my God, let me tell you the crazy thing that happened in the White House today. Instead, it makes a joke, and you have to infer it. Irony, puns, all of these things are so good for your brain because in order to understand the joke, you have to work. Whereas, like I said, if the pundit is just talking to you and saying, this is what you should think, your brain is like, it's not doing anything, it's not active, it's not practicing critical thinking. Satire depends on you practicing critical thinking. And so the other thing it can do is it can speak truth to power in a way that's fun, in a way that doesn't feel depressing, right? There are certain really great journalists out there, but you listen to them and you're like, oh man, this just sucks. But you watch Jon Stewart, he can say that same thing and you feel excited, right? The other piece that shows us how powerful satire is the degree to which it's become seen as such a threat. And this has always been true. But we're seeing a real rise in that, right? The interview, the backlash to the interview, who saw that movie? It's actually a lot more funny than I thought it would be. I recommend seeing it before you have any opinion about it. But what we're seeing is, what is it that's making satire not just the primary source of news for so many people, but now a thing that people want to control and limit? The Chinese government has just recently banned puns. Now, anyone in here who knows Mandarin, anyone in here who knows Mandarin knows that's kind of impossible because the entire language is kind of all about words that sound very similar that you can play with. But we had the Charlie Hebdo attacks, which led us to think in really deep ways, right, about freedom of speech issues. But it's not just freedom of speech, it's freedom of satire. What is it about satire that scares people so much? And then I have a picture here of Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian Jon Stewart, who was fired from his job because people were afraid he would influence elections. It's like, oh, okay, so something's going on here. One of the things that we know that's also changing, though, is that despite these famous professional people, we have a whole new crop of satirists. They're what I call the citizen satirist. These are the people that are using satire. I hope you've at least tweeted one satirical tweet already. They are engaging in satire. They are making it happen. They don't need the professionals for it to work. Okay, so for everyone who talks about slacktivism, I talk about satire activism, right? Because it's real. Now, the other thing that we're seeing there is that all of that critique about social media, all of the, oh, you know, your parents say, oh, why are you spending so much time on Facebook? You're like, oh, I'm being political, Mom. I'm engaging in the participatory democracy that I'm a part of. We no longer have to think that having fun means we're not being political. That binary makes no sense at all, okay? We can have fun and have a public and important impact. And the idea that you would put a picture of a cat who stuck its head through bread up and then, you know, a tweet is okay. We don't have to always be political all the time to be pure, too, right? So let me walk you through an example. The government shutdown. You may or may not remember exactly what was behind all of that, but the short version is we had a shutdown that was about a budget dispute, but it was meant to stall the government on a different issue, okay? And the people who were leading the shutdown were the Republicans, and the Democrats were like, what the heck? All right. So immediately we had Twitter launched government shutdown pickup lines, which were amazing, such as, yeah, I can't tell you some of them. They're really good. You got to look them up. I realized I was being recorded. I'm like, I must be from the 1% and you must be from the middle class because all I want to do is you. Government shutdown pickup lines. Okay, all right, so here's how we're going to do this because they told me I'm not supposed to read slides. I want to give you an example of a really good tweet that made a big impact during the government shutdown. I'm going to read the questions and you answer, okay? Can I burn down your house?
No.
Just the second floor?
No.
Garage?
No.
Let's talk about what I can burn down.
No.
You aren't compromising. This was the rhetoric. This was the narrative. Now, Judd Legum is a cool guy. He's actually an editor at Think Progress, but he's not a satirist. This tweet was retweeted over 20,000 times. Why? Because it was a satirical way of breaking down the ridiculous narrative we were getting fed all the time in the news media about how the reason why the shutdown wasn't advancing was because the Democrats wouldn't compromise. They're like, no, what you're trying to do is burn my house down, right? So it's smart, it's fun, it's powerful, it's right at your fingertips. Oh, and then it goes to Congress. Because the Democrats use it to explain to the Republicans, this is what the people think. So it isn't just a one-off. It isn't just you goofing around and sharing some little thing with your friends. It actually has an ability to have a direct and open public impact. So what can you do today? You can open up a satirical Twitter account. We have Top Conservative Cat, who's defined as a Colbert conservative and has, 180,000 followers, 110 on that capture. Or you can just send an awesome tweet out. These things matter. They make a really big difference. They change how people think. And if you want to have political impact, you start by changing how people think. And you start by making thinking critically fun, not painful, not so, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the idea, right? If you're being political, you have to be serious. This is so different, and it's accessible. These are not professional satirists, and they are having a huge impact. We have seen, too, a nice and smooth connection from social media to social action. Don't forget, that what you do on Twitter does lead to getting out into the street, does lead to how people vote, does lead to making things different. It's not as though it's one or the other. And when somebody calls you a slacktivist, you ask them what they did. What did you do today? Okay, just because I clicked like, you didn't do anything except for blame me for clicking like. So the idea that clicking like on something is useless is a mistake, because it's a nice and smooth continuum. And satire, we've seen, has gotten people to really stand up, from the rally on the National Mall that Colbert and Stewart did to all sorts of examples that we've seen of people literally Occupy Wall Street. We could talk about forever, right, as a great example of that. So that's what I've got for you. I hope that you can spend at least the next 4 minutes coming up with your own satirical tweet and thinking about how you can change the world with it.